Hello and welcome back to another Eduonics tutorial. In this section, we'll be going over the different tools in Photoshop, and in this video, we'll be finishing off the manipulation tools. This time, I'm going to get going with the eraser tool. One of the simplest tools in Photoshop. It's basically a brush that erases anything on a layer while the layer is selected. Now, when I use this a little bit, you'll notice that the color the eraser is leaving behind is white. By default, you cannot erase content on a locked background layer. Instead, Photoshop will fill the erased content with your current background color. The background color is located in the Tools panel near the bottom. These two boxes represent our foreground and background color swatches. If you click the one on the right, it will bring up our background swatch picker, and over here you can see that our background color is set to white. Let's try changing the background color to something else, like red. Now when I use the eraser tool, Photoshop is automatically filling the layer with our background color, which is currently set to red. Fortunately, this is a behavior that only happens when you try to erase a locked background layer. I'm going to undo all of my erasing by going up to the History panel and clicking my original document. To unlock my background layer, I'm just going to double click it and then click OK. Now when I use my eraser tool, you can see that it is leaving behind a checkerboard pattern instead, which indicates that these areas of the layer are completely transparent. If I click the eye icon next to my layer to hide it, you can see that the checkerboard pattern remains. The checkerboard pattern is the blank canvas of Photoshop. It's your document without any content on it. One thing to know about the eraser tool is that it is a destructive tool. And what I mean by that is that when you use it, it literally destroys the areas of the layer that are erased. And you can't show those areas again unless you undo everything by going back in your history state. Let's say that I want to start erasing this background here in the bottom left corner. I'm going to increase my eraser size by hitting the right bracket key on my keyboard a few times, then I'll get to work on erasing. Everything's going good at first, but eventually I'm going to make a mistake and start erasing her shoulder. I could go back to my history panel and undo it, but it's going to take all the work I did with it. This is the only reason why I don't use the eraser tool very often. So a good habit to get into is to duplicate your layer before you make any destructive changes to it. I'll go up to the History panel and go back to my document's original history state. What I like to do whenever I open an existing image is to drag the background layer to the New Layer icon. Then click the eye on my original background layer to hide it. This is great because it gives me instant access to my original image while keeping it locked and hidden keeps me from accidentally altering it in any way. So now, if I make any mistakes on my duplicate, I can just copy the original again and keep going. Now, I'd like to get rid of this background and leave only this lady. I'm going to start using my eraser tool to erase around her. But you can see that a lot of hair is being cut off by my eraser tool. In fact, it would nearly be impossible to erase this background without erasing a lot of other details with it. This is where our next tool comes in. Right-click the Eraser flyout menu and click the Background Eraser tool. I'm going to increase the size with my right bracket key until it gets pretty big. When I start erasing, I'm going to focus on this tiny crosshair in the middle. For this tool, whatever color is touching the crosshair will be removed. I'm going to make sure that the crosshair only touches the color I want to remove, and I'm only going to click once at a time. You can see that the background eraser tool is erasing the background color I want removed, but if I click and drag, the crosshair is going to graze over some of those strands of hair and start erasing those too. Up here in the tool options, I'm going to switch the sampling from continuous to once, which is just one button over. Now, if I click with the crosshair in the background, I can drag anywhere I want, because the tool is now only going to erase the first color I click. This is looking better, but I want to take this to the next level. Hair is notoriously difficult to work around, especially when you have all these thin strands that fray out from the rest. I'm going to show you a very easy way of using this tool to erase the background and leave all the hair where it belongs. First, I'm going to delete this layer by dragging it to the delete icon, and make another duplicate of my original by dragging it to the new layer icon. I'm going to double click the name of this layer to rename it to hair. When I erase the background of this layer, I'd like to show white behind it. So I'll create a new layer by clicking the new layer icon. Then, to fill it with white, I'm going to go up to Edit, Fill with White. Then I'll drag this white layer below the hair layer. Now, I'll select my hair layer and see what it looks like when I erase. With white as my new background, I can see these strands of hair a little clearer. That will help me to decide what tool settings might be best for this image. I'm going to go back up to the tool options and click the arrow for my brush preset picker. I'd like to use an eraser with a softer edge, so I'm going to reduce the hardness to around 50%. Also, when I drag this tool, I'd like the path to be a bit smoother too, so I'll reduce the spacing from 25% to 5%. I'll also go over to the limits and switch them from contiguous to discontiguous. I'm going to undo my last erase by hitting Ctrl-Z on my keyboard. Now when I erase, things feel a little bit smoother, and the softer edges will be much more forgiving if I make any minor mistakes. The hair is looking pretty good, but the tint is still looking a little green, which means that my tool isn't erasing quite enough instances of the background color. To improve this, I'll undo my erase and then go over to Tolerance. Tolerance sets the range of colors you want to erase. I'm going to increase this to about 65%. Now as I erase the background, the tool is removing just enough color to leave the hair untouched, and it's affecting just enough tint to make the hair look decent on a white background. But if I accidentally graze against the skin, you can see that the eraser tool is removing some tinting from the skin as well. I want to protect this skin from being affected, so I'll go up to the tool options once again and click the box Protect Foreground Color. Then I'll go and click my foreground swatch to bring up my color picker. Then I can sample a spot on her skin and click OK. Now when I erase the background, I can get closer to the skin without affecting it because it's being protected by the tool options. As I move around the image, I can keep changing my foreground color to match the areas I need to protect. If you look closely in her hair, you can see there's still some tint left over from the background. But I've already erased all of the background over here. How can I sample the color I want to remove? I'll just go back to sampling and switch it to background swatch. Then I'll select the background swatch in the tools panel and sample the color I want removed. Now I can erase an exact color without having to worry about what's in the crosshair. So with these settings, we can select the color we want to remove by setting the background color, and the color we want to keep by setting the foreground color. This is a fantastic way to erase backgrounds from a large variety of images, and I hope that you can add it to your usable techniques. Let's go to our next tool by right-clicking the Eraser flyout menu and pick the Magic Eraser tool. The Magic Eraser tool works a lot like the Magic Wand tool, only instead of selecting a range of colors, it just deletes them. So if I just click over here on her right side, you can see that it's just deleting a certain range of colors beyond what I clicked. Just like the Magic Wand tool, I can change the tolerance to delete more or less colors based on what I clicked. And over here, I can uncheck Contiguous to delete all instances of the colors across the whole image without having to directly click them. You can see that this probably isn't the best tool to use in this scenario. A better scenario would be an image with a very basic background and stark contrast in colors, without all these wispy hairs to get in the way. I'm going to undo this and go back to my background eraser tool to finish off this area. Back in the Tools panel, I'm going to choose the Blur tool, just the second set of tools below our eraser tools. This whole set of tools is very self-explanatory. The Blur tool is basically just a brush that blurs an image's edges as you drag it around. So if we wanted to blur her hair out a bit and make her face stand out a little bit more, all we would have to do is click and drag the Blur tool around her hair, and we'll see it gradually fade in focus. With the Blur tool, you can continue to apply it over the same area to blur it more and more. You can also set its initial strength in the tool options above. Let's go back to our Tools panel and right-click the Blur tool to bring up the flyout menu. I'm going to click the Sharpen tool. The Sharpen tool does the exact opposite thing that the Blur tool does. Simply drag it over an area you want to bring into more focus, and it will sharpen the edges and colors. It is, however, very easy to overdo it with the Sharpen tool, as it tends to chop all the colors down to their purest form and produce a lot of color noise. So, the Sharpen tool is best used in small doses. Now, back in the Tools panel, I'll right-click the Sharpen tool to get to the Smudge tool. The Smudge tool can be pretty fun. You can use a very strong smudge to affect a very large area, or you can decrease the strength of the smudge to make some more minor changes. Either way, this is a fun tool to mess around with. If you enable finger painting in the tool options above and pick a foreground color you want to use, you can smudge with color as if you were finger painting. Pretty neat. Skin can be very temperamental in images, and sometimes when you want to make some very minor changes, you can wind up ruining skin tones and making things look awful. Go over to the Tools panel and select the Dodge tool. The Dodge tool allows you to target different tones of color and brighten them. To remove some of these shadows on her neck, I'm just going to paint with my Dodge tool in the areas I want to brighten up. You can see that here in the tool options under Range, we have midtones selected. This means that the tool is currently targeting the areas that are neither very bright or very dark. Instead, it's falling somewhere in the middle. I'm going to click and change this to shadows instead. So I can go back down here and finish off some of the darker areas that I couldn't get the first time around. If we go back up, we also have this option here to protect tones. This is especially helpful when working with skin because it works to preserve the colors so the tool only focuses on the brightness of an area. Back in the Tools panel, I will right-click my Dodge tool to get to the Burn tool. The Burn tool works in the exact opposite way from the Dodge tool in that it darkens areas instead of brightening them. So with the Dodge tool, we're dodging shadows, and with the Burn tool, we're burning them deeper. I'm just going to darken some of these shadows under her eyes so you can see what I mean. Back in the Tools panel again, I'm going to right-click my Burn tool to get to the Smudge tool. This one works very differently from the other tools in this flyout. It affects the saturation of an image. Up in the tool options, the mode is set to desaturate. So, as we brush this around, you can see that it's sapping all of the color out of her face, making it appear more black and white. Changing the mode to saturation will have the opposite effect and make the colors much more vivid. This flow option sort of serves as the tool's strength. The higher it is, the more work the tool will do. You may find, though, that the more that you desaturate an area, the harder it will be to resaturate that area with the tool, since the tool will no longer have any more colors to saturate. Okay, we've discussed the tools we can use to select the pixels of an image, and we've gone over the tools we can use to manipulate those areas of an image. In the next section, I'll go over how to create things in Photoshop from scratch with the creation tools.